Hello, and welcome to Catholicism in the Car. My name is Parker Zerbal. Today I want to just talk and think about a little more the basis of our understandings for certain things as Catholics and as religious people in general. Now, this question, I've been thinking about this a long time, and its catalyst is the question regarding the papacy in Catholicism. The question regarding the papacy. And how to weigh the evidence, what the evidence is, and then more particularly, I think, is what's most interesting is what are the limits of our understanding on this issue. What are our epistemological limits on issues such as these? Questions like, what are the epistemological limits to historical questions? What are the epistemological limits that we have of scriptural questions? And then the epistemological limits of philosophical questions, or I guess you could say questions in general. So maybe let's take this threefold structure. I want to kind of just discuss this, work through this. So first, maybe starting out on the epistemological limits of our historical knowledge. Now, I'm not a historian. I enjoy studying history. I think it's fascinating. I like the story aspect of it, and I also like the research aspect. It's really satisfying to be able to go back to primary sources and be able to not just understand, okay, what did this thinker believe, or how did he understand reality, but more so, I think it's fascinating to see how similar we are, even if thousands of years separate us. Like, a few months ago, I was reading through a number of the works of Aristotle and Plato, and while, I'm sure over history there have been a lot of things added, and there's been plenty of things that have been lost, and probably interpretations tweaked here and there, translations tweaked, things like that. It's also possible that translations have been, quite mangled in areas. I mean, these are things. These are important questions, and in a lot of ways, there's not many answers to them. If we take Aristotle and Plato, for example, we know that people like Avicenna, who's what was he, about 1000 AD, I believe, Avicenna. He was a Muslim philosopher who, along with Averroes, another Muslim philosopher in Spain, influenced a lot of the 13th century thinkers in Catholicism, like Thomas Aquinas, and also Bonaventure, and then by extension, Scotus, Occam, and some others. Avicenna, it seems clear, had access to writings of Aristotle that we do not have access to now. Actually, it seems like quite a bit has been lost. Quite a bit. I think Avicenna mentions that there was all that we have left is Aristotle's class notes, basically, which is why they come out kind of feeling like a textbook. But but we don't have anything more like polemical, I guess you could say, from Aristotle. And Avicenna seems to think that that he had. It appears that Avicenna had access to these more polemical works of Aristotle, and that's like, you read that and you're like, well, how much have we lost in the last 1,000 years? How much knowledge have we lost? You think about the tragedy of losing the knowledge of one human being who maybe didn't write anything their entire life, and that's a tragedy to have them lost to history, to have that individual, their thoughts, their feelings, their desires lost to history. But then the people that did write things down, and the people that wrote considerable amounts of things down, we have lost considerable amounts of that. So I think it's always important to kind of keep this in mind as we're thinking about such questions, particularly historical questions, that there are limits to our historical knowledge. Just because we have secondary sources, tertiary sources, so on and so forth, they can be good evidence for things, but they're not conclusive evidence for things. And even our primary sources may not be conclusive evidence on things because of translation errors, accretions that have been added in over time. Maybe not just translation errors, but translation, where the translator intentionally changes the meaning or the words of a text. Now, at certain points in history, particularly in the early Middle Ages, after the fall of the Roman Empire, when many of these things were being preserved by Catholic monks, I've heard at least that, it was considered a very grave sin to not translate, or if you're a copyist, to not copy things correctly and to the best of your ability, because of the effects of that mishap or intentional edit, basically. So I don't think people in the past took these things lightly, but just because a monastery or many monasteries said it's a sin to do this, it doesn't mean everybody followed it. And so there's plenty of things that we just will never know because of human error, either deliberately or not. Now, this also has a lot of bearing upon Scripture. I've mentioned that I've been reading Dr. Brant Petree's Catholic Introduction to the Old Testament, and in there he lays out how the oldest Hebrew text that we have of the Scriptures is from about 1000 AD. It's from 1000 AD. Now we do have versions of the Scriptures that are much older than that. The Latin Vulgate is from the 400s, and our earliest copy of the Latin Vulgate, I believe, is from the mid-400s. The earliest copy that we have of the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, which was written after the heirs of Alexander the Great, Ptolemy and others, came to conquer the Holy Land, and Greek became an important language there. And so they translated the Old Testament into Greek. The oldest manuscript that we have of that is from the 300s. So, it would seem from that alone that the Septuagint is probably more accurate in many ways than the Masoretic or the Hebrew text that we have from 1000 AD. And this is this is very important for our understanding of Scripture and how it has been carried down to us. Because yes, the original authors, the apostles and the disciples, were inspired. It was infallible what they wrote down, but that doesn't mean that translators throughout the centuries have also been inspired. We hope that by the grace of God, the translators did what was right. And in a lot of sense, you can see why, particularly with regard to Scripture, why it would be sinful for someone to either copy or translate erroneously. So it's always fascinating being able to think about the intellectual limits of these issues. So we talked about historical, our epistemological limits of history, of Scripture, and then our epistemological limits in general. And I can touch on this just briefly, but it seems, if even given skepticism, solipsism, as we've talked about before, what can you know? What can you know? If you're a skeptic or a solipsist, you pretty much the only thing you think you can know is that you're thinking. I'd say it's a pretty grim view of reality and pretty untenable. You can't live like that. But it's a interesting thing to think about. Okay. Thanks.